Welcome to the next lesson where we will continue adding detail to the Ghostbuster trap. And in this lesson, we're going to add add this kind of front panel here. So we'll add more geometry to it and details. And let's focus on this bevel for right now. So it looks like this is a pretty rounded edge, but that this edge maybe isn't as rounded as that one, but it is rounded there. And this one is maybe a little sharper. So this could be because this is a homemade thing and it's not exactly, exact machined as it would be if it were a real thing. So depending on if you want to divide these bevels up, you can do that and do them separately. I say we just do them all together so that it's, a little quicker, and you can add more detail or do the bevel separately if you want at a later time. The one thing I want to do before I do that as well is to finish out this kind of bottom section. You can see that this goes down to a kind of footprint that doesn't just go straight down to the floor. So there's this kind of inset area that we can do with the poly extrude tool and adding some edge loops and things that we've learned. So let's go to the insert edge loop tool, and I'm going to go to the tool settings over here to make sure that we're back on relative distance. And I'm just going to choose one kind of area here and use that. And then I'm going to go to the face mode and select all the faces. Whoops, I'm still on the insert edge loop tool, and I'm going to turn off the tool settings now. So let's go to the face mode. We'll choose Q or W, whichever, to select the faces, and I'll hit 4 to make sure those are all the ones selected. Go back to 5, and now I will choose the poly extrude tool, and I'll just pull in the thickness a little bit. Whoop. You can see we have keep faces together off, so let's turn that on. And as this goes in, it'll all go together. The only thing with this is it's also going up. So that's the only issue there, is the fact that this is going up. If we go to the front view, holding down spacebar, clicking and dragging from the middle, you can see it's going up. So we can offset that later. Let's just bring the thickness in. So it's not just the same. So that looks about right. It looks like it goes in, and maybe there's another layer here. So let's deal with that. Let's go to the front view, and I'm going to go to the vertice mode, and I'm just going to select all the bottom vertices. I'll click W, and then I'm going to hit X now. I'm going to hold down X on my keyboard, and that will snap to the grid because I want this on the floor, so it'll snap to the grid. Now let's add another edge loop so that we can kind of get this bottom section out and do the same thing we just did. Let's go to face mode, select all the faces. Whoops, again, I'm still in the edge loop mode, so I'll hit Q to get off of that. Select all of the faces, go to the extrude, and let's just extrude this out. Oh, and we want to keep faces together on, as we did before. Let's have that somewhere between kind of the front and insert edge here. Now I'll go back to the vertices, select them, and hold down X to drag them up to the floor again. So now we've created, whoops, now we've created this kind of inset kind of footprint here. And I want to do that before we do the bevel so that we can bevel all of these together. Let's go back to this. It looks like this is fairly rounded at the bottom. So let's select the edges we want to bevel and start beveling. We'll go to the edge mode. I'll select this edge and that edge, this edge and that edge. So we're just going through and holding down Shift to select more than one edge. And let's see what we're going to do down here. Let's do these corners later because it won't be as similar to these, or kind of the same distance of an edge loop. So let's just do these top ones. So let's go to Edit Mesh, Bevel. I'm going to Command Shift click it to add it to our shelf. And now we can see it's starting to bevel the edges. Now, this one doesn't have a tool that pops up. So we can go over here to the Poly Bevel input, and it'll pop it up for us here. So we can change the fraction, which is how far it is. We can change the segments, which we will need many more. And if you can see I'm clicking and dragging, not a lot's happening. It's because the pie chart here is too slow. So let's speed that up so that I can add more sections here. Cool. So we've rounded those two out. And the thing I want to do actually is to move these closer together. So I'm going to go to the edge. I'm going to double click this. You can see because now this is a triangle. So in Maya, it only likes quads. Everything in this model so far is a quad, meaning 4 sides, except for this. So when I double click it, that's why it doesn't select this edge loop, because it stops here on this triangle. So just be aware that Maya does not like triangles in that regard. So now that I have this selected, I just want to move this a little bit closer. So it's a more of an extreme angle, and select these edges again. Cool. Let's hit the poly bevel, and we'll click on the input over here, and let's hit T to bring up the menu. And let's add more segments to this. And that's looking pretty good. So if we go back to this, we can see also along this edge, it's not perfectly flat. So we could actually add more bevel to these edges as well. So let's go to the edge tool, and we'll double click this. And let's select all the edges, the kind of outward facing edges here of the object. So I'm just holding down Shift and selecting them. And I'm going to do these bottom ones later. So let's deselect those. Cool. So I'll Shift select this edge. Deselect by, I'm holding down Control to deselect things. Sorry, I didn't mention that. So double click that and go in here. Select these. Control click, drag, deselect that. And let's bevel these edges as well. So we'll go back to the bevel tool, and that looks a lot better. Let's hit T to pull up the tool, and we can change this fraction if we want. Let's add maybe one more segment in there. And so the fraction will stop based on how much room it has. You can see it's running into this edge here. So it can't go any further than that. And I think that's okay for us, but just know that in your case, if you wanted to go further, it can't go further than that edge. So you'd have to move this edge before you beveled so it could go further than that. So now we have a much nicer edge here. If you look at these, because we didn't bevel this one looks very CG, very exact and hard. And this one is just a tiny bit softer, and it adds a lot to the model. Okay, so the other thing that we run into here are a normals situation. Normals are how Maya knows what direction a face is facing. So if we go to display and we go down to polygons, we can turn on face normals. I'm just going to pop this out because I'm going to turn them off here and again in a second. So let's click face normals. And now you can see we get all these green little arrows. So that tells you which direction the faces are pointing. And for the most part, they're all pointing in the right way. But I bring all of this up because it will affect how Maya views and shades the object in this kind of almost fake like shaded mode that you can see in the viewport. So I bring this up because I'll turn that off just by clicking face normals again. Close this. You can see this is kind of shaded in a weird way. If we click off of here, it's kind of, you know, there's this gray area here. It's white. It's like, what's happening here? This looks weird. So there's a couple of different things we can do. And first off, we can clean up the geometry a little bit if we wanted. You can see here we have an issue that this has a face. So I'm hitting F to zoom in on it and then zooming out. You know, this has a face. It's not connecting here. It should connect here. So there's no edge here. So it's like, it's trying to drag this face over this thing without an edge. And so that's why this one is shaded weird. You can see it has like a dark area on the top here. And then it's lighter here, but this one doesn't look the same way. So we get this hard edge. So if we go to the multi-cut tool, let's go to the mesh tools and we'll go down to multi-cut and we'll command shift that, add it to our shelf. If I click that, I can select a vertice and select another one and it'll cut this in half if I hit enter. So now we have room for that to describe what's actually happening. If I select off of here, you can see it's still shaded in a weird way, and we can fix that in a second. But before we do that, we need to add the geometry in here so it knows how to describe that area. So we're going to the multi-cut tool. Let's do that to this side as well and hit enter. Now, if I go to mesh display, and let me zoom in here so we can see this change. If I go to mesh display and hit average, you can see it changes the whole model. If I go to mesh display conform or set to face, I think is what we want. Now it looks right. So that's just one way to fix that. Now that we've set the normals to be to the face, we can see that we're kind of getting these hard edges here on the curved areas. Whoa, my computer thinks I'm right clicking when I'm not. We get these hard edges here. You can kind of see this gradient from dark to bright here and these stepped kind of colors. And to get rid of that, let's select the object and go to soften, harden edges. And when we do that, it will soften and harden the right edges in the right areas. So now we do not have those weird kind of colored areas here that we were getting before. So that's a way to get around that and to get these smooth areas to look smoother. So we've done quite a bit in this lesson with beveling edges. So I'm going to go ahead and end this one here. And in the next lesson, we'll start to add this detail of this panel to the object. Thanks for watching. We did some beveling of the edges. Let's finish that up. But first, I noticed that at some point my model got uncentered. You can see that it's not totally centered up here. So all I need to do that happens is hold down spacebar, click in the middle here, go to my right view, and I can see that it is not lined up with the handle. So I can just hold down X, and with the move tool selected, I can just snap it to the middle. So now that I can tell that it is centered up with everything and we're ready to continue. So if anything like that happens, it's no big deal, just figure it out and snap it back to the center. You can, change the pivot if you need to, all that kind of stuff. So don't feel like you're always stuck or, you can't, change something or whatever. It's, it's just a matter of getting comfortable with these tools and starting to use them. So one thing I want to do is add this type of a bevel here to more areas quickly. So and it looks like maybe that's what I did. I middle mouse dragged this while I had the manipulator tool selected. Is probably how it got off centered. So just be careful about that. And you can always fix that. So let's select the edges here, right clicking, going up to edge, and we will go through and shift select the edges that we would like to bevel, and double clicking. It looks like I accidentally didn't have shift held down, so I'll hold down shift and just double clicking these in these corners. I'm going to do the bottom corner separate because I want those to have a different kind of bevel. And let's do this one as well, and this one. And these might not be super clean because we're doing them separate from the sides. Ideally, we do these together because their intersection might be kind of dirty. So we'll see if that works at all. If it doesn't, we can just skip that, and you can undo the bevel from earlier and get back to that. So now that we have that selected, we can go to bevel, and yeah, you can see on these corners, if we don't do these together, then they're kind of wonky a little bit. We can always fix that if we need to. And it looks like I missed one edge here as well. So let's go back to bevel, and then let's go to the poly bevel input here that we created. We can hit T to bring up the options here if we'd like and resize this to make it more clear. And let's go to a higher fraction here and add at least one segment. And let's go to object mode so we can see that and deselect it. Looks like it did a pretty good job. The only thing we need to fix down here is this kind of intersection. So if, you happen to do these bevels separately and there's some wonky thing like this, this is modeling. This is, creating things on the fly, making different decisions, and then fixing things when they're not working. So what we can do is just add a little multi-cut tool here, and we can add that edge in. We can do that to the bottom here as well, and hit enter. And if I go to the vertice mode here, and I zoom in here, just so I can hit F to have something to focus in on. We're so close to it that it's kind of hard to see. Let's go to the edge mode, and let's just delete these edges that we don't need. Actually, we need these in the center, so I'm control clicking and dragging those. So now I'm going to go shift, right click, delete edge, and now we have that. So let's go to the vertex mode and just drag this up. And if we want to make it precise, we can go to a camera view that's orthographic so we can see it in line with everything else. And we can just drag it up so it's in line with this line here. We could also vertex snap it, holding down V, and now we know it's in line. We can see the ones down here also need to be fixed. I'm going to leave that for now and let you fix that if you'd like, but that's how you fix, intersections like that. It looks like that one needs to be fixed as well. So I'm just holding down spacebar and clicking in the center to get to the right camera and holding down V to drag that to the right spot. And then going back to perspective with the holding down spacebar, dragging, clicking and dragging. So that's how we fix intersections like that when something like that occurs. And again, that's just part of modeling, being flexible, because, say you had a supervisor and now they want to add more bevels and you've already done all this beveling, things don't happen perfectly from one step to another. So you need to be able to adapt and know the tools well enough to adjust the model as needed. And again, I'm just going to leave that one now for time's sake. It looks like we need to do that on every corner, but for time's sake, let's just leave that. And let's look at these edges here. I want to just select the corner pieces, and I want it to go all the way to the edge there on the inside. So let's control click deselect areas that we don't need and double check that we have everything selected. And let's get this side as well. Just double clicking and then control clicking it to deselect. Whoops. Looks like I zoomed out in the wrong spot. So one thing I just did, sorry, it's a habit. I'm used to using these tools, so I'll have to slow down here. I'm not entirely sure what just happened. The view just went away. So the first thing I did was hit the bracket button on the keyboard. And so that'll just go back to your previous camera view. And so we can toggle between wherever the camera went. I'm not entirely sure. I might have hit A, which is frame everything. And, who knows why it went that way. This is just part of working in 3D sometimes. But yeah, just hit bracket and you can get back to the previous camera view if you're ever, missed where you went or something like that. Things go haywire sometimes. And yeah, if you know the tools well enough, it's not that big a deal to just get back to where you were. Okay, so we have those done. So I did those separately because I'm going to go back to polybevel here, hit T. We could also do it from this menu, but it just looks better to me to use this one, floating one. Let's increase the fraction. And I did this separately because I wanted to do these separately. And it looks like we're going to be prohibited by this interior piece here. So it's getting stuck right here. I can't go any wider than that. So let's undo this. And we have this selection. And instead of remaking this selection, let's create a quick select set. So that's just a way that we can get that selection back without having to redo that all over again. So we'll go to create, we'll go down to sets and quick select set. And we'll just say bevel edges. We don't even have to name this because we'll probably just delete it here in a minute. And we'll say, okay. So now we can unselect it and we can save that selection for later. So let's delete these kind of edges here so that we can have a greater range in the bevel. And again, you know, may seem like tedious work, but this is just modeling. This is part of modeling. If you want to get into modeling, whoa, what's happening here? If you want to get into modeling, this is just part of modeling to, you know, like I was saying a minute ago, to kind of run into problems and then solve them. So we have all those selected. So I'll hit Shift, hold down Shift and right click, get to delete edge. So now when we go to the bevel edges, let's just go to quick select sets, bevel edges. Now we have that selection. So we learned something in that process of problem solving. So now that we have that, we can go back to the bevel tool. And when we pull out the fraction here, we should be able to go a lot further. Oh, no, we're stuck by those. So I think what we have to do here is, because we're still stuck by these interior pieces, we're going to have to create, we're going to have to deselect this line here. So let's just undo this and control drag that. So again, you know, anytime I'm modeling something, in my head I have an idea of how it should work, but it's not entirely certain that's going to be the case. So let's go to poly bevel. Now here we go. So let's zoom in and let's see if we can increase the segments here. And let's go to object mode and see how that looks. It's looking pretty good. So one thing you might notice is this kind of line here, and I think that's because we don't have the geometry here to support this area. So one thing we can do is go to the multi-cut tool and click here and go to the edge that's missing and do the same for this side. And now when we go to the object mode and click off, it's still there, maybe not as bad. So now we have the corners beveled here. Let's move on to creating the panel on the right side. So let's go and create a new object. We'll go to poly modeling shelf, create a cube, and bring it up. Most things that ever start to get modeled in Maya start with a cube or a sphere, something simple, and then you add complexity to it later. So I'm just using the scale tool to change the size and get it roughly in the right spot. So we can just we can do the same thing that we did before. Let's hold down D and V and vertex snap it to the edge, to its farthest edge, and then go back to the manipulator mode and then hold down V with just the normal move tool, and it'll snap right to that face. And so now also when we scale it, it should scale from that face. So we don't have to worry about like going inside of the trap itself. And this is important to have a separate piece, because when we add materials later, we want to have a different object. You can see over here, it's called P cube 3, and we can start naming these things if we want to clean this up. But basically this is a separate object. We can see it in the outliner, so we know it's a separate object. So it can have a different material, because if we look at the reference, this is a kind of aluminum metal, and this is like a painted black or something. So it's good to have those separated out. Okay, so let's go to the edges here. Let's right click, go to edge mode. I'll just select everything and bevel everything together. And if we go back, I can click it here, but I like to go back to the custom shelf, so it keeps everything a little organized. And go to poly bevel, and let's just increase the segments to 2. And right click to go to object mode, and clicking and dragging, of course, to the object mode option here, and letting go. So now we have that. Let's look at creating the screws here. we have these kind of semicircular ends that go in. And then this looks like a cylinder type of a screw. So let's create this and show you one other tool called a Boolean. So let's go to the polymodeling shelf, create a sphere, and let's just group all of this. And so I'm shift selecting everything in the outliner and hitting Command G, and that will group everything. We can call this trap or GB trap and hit enter. And now I can, with that selected, I can hit Command H, or sorry, I can hit Control H, and that'll hide it. So now I can focus on what I'm working on here. You can see it kind of graded out here, so we know it's hidden. And to get that back, we can just hit Shift H. Okay, so with P-Sphere, let's create its screw kind of inset here. So let's scale this down, hitting R, scale it down, and I want to select all the faces on the outside here. So I'm going to click and drag and select all those faces. Then I'm going to go to the custom shelf and go to extrude. And with keep faces together off, I'm going to increase the thickness. And I'm going to hit the little pie chart here to make that go slower. And I can actually look at this from a top-down view, holding down space, clicking, and going to top view. And I can see how far out I want this to actually affect the screw head here. So something like that, I think. Now I'm going to go back to perspective and right-click to object mode. Hit the R for scale and scale up in the Y here. Drag this down, and we want this to go in as far as we think we need the screw to go. So maybe pretty far, something like that. We can go to wireframe mode by hitting 4, and we can see it doesn't go all the way to half. So, you know, because this is sticking out at least half and it's more pancake shape, we could actually just go ahead and do that with the sphere. Let's go into the right view, and let's go to face mode, right clicking on the sphere and going to face. And also, if that ever happens where you accidentally go into UV mode and now you're in a whole new menu, you can just hover back over the one you were in, the little gray dot here, and it'll go back to that menu. Or you can just let go of right click while you don't have anything selected, and it'll get you back to this. So let's go to the faces, click and drag all the faces below the half here. We can see this is kind of our ground plane, or 0. So we can hit just delete on that. For faces, you don't have to do anything special. You can just delete them with the delete button on the keyboard. So let's go back to object mode, and then we can scale this down, hitting R, scale this down to be more pancake shaped. Now we can move this down to be something like this. We don't want to go all the way through, so we want to leave a little gap here at the bottom. So let's go back to perspective, holding down spacebar, and then let's hit 5 to go back to shaded. And with the sphere selected here, and then this one selected, we can go to mesh, Boolean. And Booleans are basically a way to subtract or add one object to another. So now that we have that done, we want a difference. So let's click that, and boom, we have a difference, and we have our screw. So that's super helpful. You don't have to model every little corner, and it's like, you know, with these edges on a sphere, how do you actually even get that? So it's nice to have a Boolean every once in a while. They can be kind of wonky, and you do have to select things in the correct order. So if I didn't do it in that order, if I selected, let me hit Q to get back to my tool, and sometimes my Maya has a little buggy thing where I need to shake the viewport a little bit or use the viewport, and it'll let me start to use tools again. So you might run into similar bugs when you're using it. So I'll shift select it in a different way. Now you can see it does the reverse. So you want to make sure you're selecting it in the proper order and that you're using the right Boolean. And that's why I tore off the menu here, because it's nice to have it in case you screw up to, you know, just go ahead and use it again and again. So we can close that out. We have this made, and now let's bring our trap back. And also, now that we're looking at the outliner, you can see it creates all this history when you do a Boolean. You know, if we look at the input over here, we deleted the faces, so it says delete component. We extruded it's combining the inputs from the two pieces, and then you have this Boolean. So it gets really messy, and then it creates these empty shapes. And those are quite useless and can actually be harmful in the future. So when you do a Boolean and you've done it and it's, you're done using it, it's good to go ahead and clean up that piece of geometry and delete the history. So go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. You want to make sure you do not do Delete All by Type. When it says Delete All, it means everything in your scene, not just what you have selected. So this is a very important distinction right now. These are not the same thing, okay? Delete by Type is what you have selected. Delete All by Type is everything in your scene. We just want to do what we have selected. So we're going to go to Delete by Type and go to History. Now you can see all those inputs are gone and all those empty groups over here are gone. So it's much cleaner to do once you do a Boolean like that. So let's click this and hit Shift-H to bring it back, unhide it, and click the sphere here. And let's bring it over and rotate it 90 degrees by clicking that, typing it in the channel box. And let's vertex snap the pivot, holding down D and V to the bottom here. So then we can vertex snap, holding down V to the front face of the object. So now we can slide it around knowing it's on the front. And because we have ambient occlusion on up here, we can see it kind of has this shadow effect around it. So we know, kind of where it is in space a little better. I'm also just going to save real quickly because it's doing crazy things. Anytime Maya's doing crazy things, it's good to save. And of course, you can follow along with all these lessons in the according numbered scene. So we're in number 4 right now, so you can pick up where we left off there and use the same model in the same scene. So I'm just going to bring that up here somewhere and scale it down. And that works pretty good for me. So now we've started to add this panel, and we can add a couple more details, like these cylinders are something super easy to do. Let's just create a cylinder, bring it over, rotate it down 90 degrees. So I like to do it here first, so it tells me which axis I'm doing it over here. So then I know which one I need to type it into up there. The other thing I want to do is add more subdivisions to the caps. So I'm going to untoggle down the input here for the cylinder and go to subdivision caps and just say, let's just say 3 for fun. And the reason I'll show you here in a second, because we need to adjust the model a little bit. I'm going to drag this out, scale it down, move it over, move it up, do all this fun stuff that you know how to do now. And let's just scale it down and then drag it out. Let's see how they're kind of far apart and maybe a little thicker. One really interesting thing is isolating where you're scaling from. This is something I use all the time, and I didn't know years later until I was using Maya. So into using Maya, I didn't know this. So say I want to scale the radius of this thing. I could do this, and then I could do this, and I could do this, and do this, and I'm not entirely sure if it's keeping the right circle shape. So, if I don't want to scale in this direction, but I want to scale in the other 2 directions, all I have to do is hit Control and click and use that. And now it's isolating those other 2 ones. You can see the red and blue things are going up and down, but the one I'm clicking on isn't. This is a huge, huge, helpful little tip that took me a couple years to figure out, and now you know it in the first hour of learning Maya. So this is the benefit of taking these kinds of classes. You can learn what took me quite some time to learn. So the next thing I want to do is go into edge mode, and the reason why we added these caps is I'm just shift and double clicking them to get the edge loops. Is if you look here, you can see it kind of has this bevel. We could actually bevel it if we wanted to, but let's just have a little more control over it in our own way and scale these 2 edge loops in a little bit. And it does pretty much the same thing. So now we've added that detail ourselves, and we could even go further and bevel these 2 edges. Now that we've done the kind of larger move, why don't we just select these, shift clicking, double clicking, And then if we go to bevel, I don't want it to look super rounded out, so I'm going to reduce the fraction quite a bit. And right click and go to object mode so I can kind of see it. It looks a lot better. And I'm going to duplicate this by hitting Command D on the keyboard, going to the manipulator tool by hitting W, and just drag another one down. And now we have those two red things that are, who knows what they are, on the side of this Ghostbuster trap. So you can also see we have another screw down here in the bottom right. So let's just duplicate this, Command D, and we'll just drag this down and over here. And now we have that. So the next thing we're going to do is create the knob here that's in the center piece. And you can see that it has these kind of ribs around that is going to create a, we're going to need a special type of technique to model that in, a repeating pattern over a kind of curved surface. And so in the next lesson, we'll cover that and add more detail to this. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned quite a bit in this lesson. All right, see you then.